So testing, 1, 2, 3. Let's talk about SAT, ACT, and APs and their future. So the biggest question I know that's still on everybody's minds is test optional. And the good news for all of you seniors out there is that there are only about 13 colleges that currently require an SAT or ACT test. So you're pretty much off the hook for most colleges in the country. Juniors and sophomores, although the chances are strong that will remain largely test optional in the coming years. I would keep your eye on the news in the spring to see if there are any big changes that come. The biggest change that we know is coming is, in fact, the advent of the first digital test of this type, and that is the digital PSAT coming this October, digital SAT coming this March to a school near you. So James, who's our resident expert on this, let's just start with a little bit of how it works. What is this? Is this students' nonsense on their laptops, like in their bedrooms, looking stuff up on the internet? Is cheating going to be rampant? What can we expect with how the digital SAT is going to work?
All good questions, Kelsey, and sorry to dash anyone's hopes out there that was hoping to SAT from their bedroom in their pajamas. You can still do it in your pajamas, but you'll have to go to an official testing site, just like we do now. You'll be on a site-provided computer, or you can use a school Chromebook or bring in your own personal laptop, but you'll have had to have downloaded the Blue Book app ahead of time. The app actually shuts down all the other programs on your computer at the same time, so you can only be on that Blue Book app taking the test. There's no chatting with friends to see how they're doing or looking stuff up online. So hopefully it'll actually reduce cheating. Another good thing about the test is it'll have a built-in timer into the app, so it doesn't depend on the proctor making sure everyone finishes. Once you start a section, it gives you exactly 35 minutes or the amount of time for that section, and it closes. There's also a little timer down there so students can see exactly how much time they have left. So it sounds like there's actually going to be a lot of advantages to the new computerized test.
So cool. So now that we know a little bit about how it's going to work, tell us a little bit about the differences, the practical differences, especially with test takers in mind.
Yeah, so the biggest change, other than it'll be on a computer rather than a paper and pencil, is that it's adaptive. It's what's called two-stage adaptive. And what that means is the first half of everyone's test will be the same for the math, the same for the reading. Students who do really well on that first section will get a different second section. They'll get harder questions, and because the computer will say, okay, you obviously did really well on those basic things. Let's throw some harder ones at you and see how you do there. Students who don't do quite as well on that first section will get an easier set of second section questions, because the computer can see, like, okay, you didn't do too well at those hard things, so let's make it a little easier. Because of that, the test will be able to ascertain a student's true ability much more quickly. Instead of 3 hours, the test will take 2 hours and 14 minutes. The College Board is very exact about that. So students will get 46 minutes, if my math is right, back to do whatever they'd like to do with 46 more minutes of time.
You could watch like a whole episode of an hour-long TV show if you're watching it on Netflix, or you could watch 2 episodes of How I Met Your Mother. You could watch a third of a movie, maybe eat some pizza or chicken wings. So that definitely is not nothing, getting that 46 minutes back. And that digital adaptive element is so cool because it's been very well researched, right? And it is very good at slotting students into exactly the same score that they can. And that is actually what allows you to get that precious 46 minutes back, is the fact that it's allowing you to skip over the questions that they feel the test has ascertained you really don't need to take, because they can predict how you would have done on them. And just as a note, there were always harder and easier questions on both SAT and ACT. It's just that you would take all of them and you would, get some of them wrong if you weren't as good, for example, at that particular section of the test. James, with all of this in mind, what are some of the need to know kind of tips for our test takers out there?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is if you're planning to take the real SAT in March of next year or later, you definitely want to practice on a computerized version, and the College Board is going to release some practice tests so you can see how it goes, because it is going to be different. The feel of it, the way the questions are arranged will be slightly different, even though the essential content will be the same in terms of math and in terms of the types of reading questions they're asking. Maybe one thing worth noting is the passages will be much shorter, about, I I think about a sixth as long as they currently are. So if you don't like reading long stuff, this test could be perfect for you. In terms of prep, one thing I would advise is definitely take a practice test. Currently for the PSAT, the College Board sends you back all the questions you missed, and it even lets you know, like, oh, you didn't do too well in word and context questions, or you did amazing at the structure organization questions. You no longer get your test back, and you no longer know which types of questions you're missing or which ones you're doing well on. So if you really want to know where do I need to study, you're going to have to take those practice tests, because that's where you're going to get the advantage of seeing, like, okay, I'm doing well in this type of question, but I need to study that other thing.
That's really, really great to know, and important for our test takers out there and parents to kind of keep in mind as you move towards this SAT for the class of 2024 and beyond. Now, this does bring up a big question. There's always been the kind of duality, right, between SAT and ACT, and now this offers an even bigger differentiation. Before, the differences really were that the ACT had longer single sections of math, of reading, of verbal, of science, and that could be a time management tricky moment. The SAT maybe felt like it didn't have quite as straightforward a way of wording its questions. Now, though, the biggest differences are going to be much more apparent, with it being digital, it being shorter, and it being adaptive. So all things for students to take into consideration in the coming years.
Yeah. Oh, one other thing I wanted to throw in there, Kelsey, is for any students who have testing accommodations, the accommodations will still be honored for whatever they are. The one exception is things like if you need a paper and pencil test, or for students who use a Braille test, they'll still have a non-adaptive paper and pencil test, but all the other types of accommodations will be honored by the new format. Actually, yeah. One other question that we hear a lot is about AP exams. So first, when do families submit them? And secondly, more broadly, what's their role in the admissions process?
Such a great question, James. I would say that, if you're a student who has taken a class, you've done well in it, you've studied really hard for your AP test, and you feel proud of your score, if it's a passing score, you should seriously consider submitting it. There's a lot more nuance to it, and if you'd like to discuss that, please do reach out to us. But what I'll say is that generally, if you do have a 4 or a 5, you should definitely consider submitting. If you feel proud of your 3, 4, or 5, then that's a good opportunity to submit. And the only time that a testing situation could possibly have a non-positive effect on you as a student with APs, as they are not required, would be if you were a student and you had taken a bajillion APs, like let's say you took 10 APs and you never took a test. That might raise a question mark in the admissions officer's mind. But other than that, APs are really like a couple of little extra sprinkles on the sundae. It's something that just adds a little bit to your academic profile. It can add a little bit of extra strength, a little bit of extra context or follow through. But other than that, they've never been required. So they're not going to be something that makes or breaks any student's application.
Yeah.
So I want to thank all of you. Thank you so much, James, for your expertise. Please plug into us for more. And if you want to have a conversation, our email is info@thecollege.org. Thank you all for watching.
Thanks. Happy testing.